I've been driving trucks for 19 years now. 19 years of white lines, black coffee, and hours that don't make sense to people who sleep in the same bed every night. You see things out there. Most of it you forget by the next fuel stop. But some things stay with you. They sit in the back of your head like a song you can't name, but can't stop humming. I'm not here to tell you what's real and what isn't. I'm just going to tell you what I heard, what I saw, and what other drivers told me when we were sitting in parking lots at 2 a.m, with nowhere to be until dawn. You can decide for yourself what to believe. But I'll say this: the road at night is a different place. And the people who spend their lives on it, they know things that stay-at-home folks don't. Not because we're special, just because we're out there when everyone else is asleep. And sometimes, when the world gets that quiet, you notice things that were always there, but nobody was awake to see. Let me tell you about some of those things. I met Carlos at a truck stop outside of nowhere about 6 years back. We were both waiting on loads that weren't ready, killing time the way you do. Bad coffee, worse food, talking to whoever would listen. Carlos was a big guy, quiet, the kind of person who doesn't say much, but when he does, you pay attention. He'd done 8 years in the army before he started driving, and he had that way about him, like he'd seen enough that nothing surprised him anymore. But that night, he told me something that surprised him, and if it surprised Carlos, it was worth remembering. He said he was driving a night run, middle of nowhere, one of those stretches where you don't see another car for an hour, and the only light is what your headlights make. It was late fall, cold enough that he could see his breath when he'd stopped for fuel earlier, and the road was empty, in that way that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. He came around a long curve and saw a man standing on the shoulder, not walking, not thumbing a ride, just standing there, facing the road, waving his arms slow and deliberate, the way you'd wave if you were trying to warn someone, not frantic, but serious, like he meant it. Carlos slowed down. He said his first instinct was that there was an accident ahead, or maybe some debris in the road. The man kept waving, kept pointing forward, and Carlos dropped his speed from 65 to maybe 40. He thought about stopping, asking what was wrong, but something about the guy made him keep rolling. He couldn't say what exactly, just a feeling. He passed the man and watched him in his mirror for a second. The guy just stood there, still facing the road, arms at his sides now, like his job was done. 2 miles later, Carlos came up on the accident. A car had crossed the median and hit a pickup head-on. The wreck was still smoking. Couldn't have happened more than 5 or 10 minutes before. Emergency lights weren't there yet. Just twisted metal and silence, and that smell that burning rubber and gasoline makes when they mix together. If Carlos had been going 65, he'd have come around that curve with no time to stop. The wreck was spread across both lanes. At 40, he had just enough distance to brake and pull onto the shoulder. He called it in and waited for the police to arrive. He didn't mention the man on the road. He didn't know how to explain it. And cops don't like stories that don't make sense. A week later, Carlos was at a different truck stop, maybe 100 miles from where it happened. He got to talking with an older driver, a local guy who'd been running that same corridor for 30 years. Carlos mentioned the accident, said he was lucky he'd slowed down in time. The old guy asked why he'd slowed down. Carlos told him about the man on the shoulder, the waving, the pointing. The old driver got quiet. Then he pulled out his phone and showed Carlos a picture. a Facebook memorial page. Some guy named David, smiling in the photo, standing next to a truck. "This him?" the old driver asked. Carlos said his whole body went cold. Same face, same build, same guy he'd seen on the road a week before. David had been a driver. Good guy. Everybody liked him. He died on that same stretch of highway 3 years earlier. Fell asleep at the wheel, crossed the median, hit a concrete barrier, died on impact. The old driver said Carlos wasn't the first person to see him out there. A couple other guys had mentioned it over the years. Always the same spot, always the same thing. A man on the shoulder, waving, warning you to slow down. Carlos asked me what I thought it meant. I told him I didn't know. I still don't. But I know Carlos, and he's not the kind of guy who makes things up. He's not the kind of guy who sees things that aren't there. He spent 8 years in places where seeing things wrong gets you killed, and he came back fine. So either he saw what he saw, or there's something wrong with his eyes that only happens on empty highways in the middle of the night. I know which one I believe. Carlos still drives that route sometimes. He told me that every time he passes that spot, he slows down a little, just in case, and he always checks his mirror after he passes. He's never seen David again, but he always looks. Now Walt, he's a different kind of driver. Been doing this for over 20 years, mostly solo, and he likes it that way. Doesn't talk much on the CB, doesn't hang around truck stops longer than he has to. He's got a wife and 2 kids at home, and when he's not driving, he's coaching Little League or fixing things around the house. Normal guy. Practical. The kind of person who checks the weather and the tire pressure and doesn't believe in anything he can't measure with a tool from his garage. That's why what he told me stuck with me. Because Walt doesn't tell stories. Walt tells you what happened, and that's it. He was running an overnight load through a long, empty stretch. Nothing but highway and darkness, and the occasional pair of headlights going the other way. His CB was on, but quiet. That time of night, most drivers are either sleeping or too tired to talk. Just the hiss of static and the hum of his engine. Then a voice came through, male, calm, clear as day, and it said his name. "Walt, don't stop at the rest area. Keep driving." That was it. Nothing else. Just those 2 sentences, and then silence. Walt said he almost drove off the road. Not because the message scared him, because hearing your name when you haven't told anyone your name, that's not supposed to happen. He hadn't keyed his mic in hours. Hadn't talked to anyone since he'd fueled up 300 miles back. Nobody on that channel knew who he was. He wasn't planning to stop at the rest area anyway. He had enough fuel, wasn't tired, just wanted to make his delivery time. But now he was thinking about it. Now he was paying attention. 10 miles later, he saw it. Rest area, right side of the highway. The kind with bathrooms and vending machines, and a few parking spots for trucks and police cars. 3 of them, lights flashing, parked at angles, like they'd gotten there in a hurry. Walt slowed down as he passed, but didn't stop. He could see cops walking around with flashlights, the beams cutting through the dark. An ambulance was pulling in from the other direction. He found out later what happened. A driver had been attacked in that rest area about an hour before Walt passed through. Guy was sleeping in his cab. Someone broke in, beat him pretty bad before another driver heard the noise and scared them off. The victim survived, but he was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Walt did the math. If he'd been running his usual speed, if he'd decided to stop and stretch his legs, he would have been in that rest area right around the time it happened. His truck, dark and quiet, an easy target. He tried to figure out who could have sent that message, checked with his dispatcher, asked around at truck stops. Nobody knew anything. Nobody had been on that channel. Nobody had said his name. He told me the thing that bothered him most wasn't the warning. Warnings he could understand. Maybe someone saw something. Maybe someone was trying to help. The thing that bothered him was how calm the voice was. Like it wasn't urgent. Like it already knew he would listen. Walt still keeps his CB on when he drives. He still doesn't talk much. But sometimes, late at night, when the static is the only sound, he wonders if that voice is still out there, watching the roads, keeping track of who's driving and where they're going. He says he's never heard it again, but he always keeps the volume up, just in case it has something else to say. Mark's story is different, harder to explain, harder to shake off. I've known Mark for about 5 years now. He got into trucking after his divorce, needed something to do with all those empty hours, needed to be somewhere his thoughts couldn't catch up with him. The road's good for that. You focus on the driving, and everything else fades into the background. He was running a late load, one of those jobs that pays extra, because nobody else wants to do it. Empty highway, gas stations closed, just him and his headlights, and a whole lot of nothing. He came up on a guy standing by the side of the road near an old gas station that had been shut down for years. Pumps dark, windows boarded up, weeds growing through the concrete. And this young guy, maybe 25, standing there with a small backpack, looking at Mark's truck like he'd been waiting for it. Now Mark doesn't usually pick up hitchhikers. Most drivers don't. Insurance, liability. You hear enough stories about things going wrong. But something about this kid made him stop. He couldn't explain it. Just felt like the right thing to do. The kid jogged up to the passenger side, climbed in, said thanks, said his name was Pete, and he was trying to get to the next town, about 60 miles up the road. His car had broken down, and his phone was dead, and he'd been walking for hours. Mark said sure, no problem. He could use the company. They talked for a while. Pete was quiet, but friendly. Said he was going to see his mum. She wasn't doing well. He was trying to get there before things got worse. Mark told him about his kids, about the divorce, about how the road was the only place he felt like himself anymore. The kind of conversation you have with strangers at 2 a.m, when the dark makes everyone honest. About 40 minutes in, Mark looked down at his gauges. Oil pressure, fuel, speed, just a quick check, the way you do. Couldn't have been more than 5 seconds. When he looked back up at the passenger seat, it was empty. He said he nearly put the truck in the ditch, swerved hard, hit the brakes, pulled over on the shoulder, with his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The cab was empty, both doors locked. He always drove with the doors locked, habit from years on the road. No way Pete could have opened the door and jumped out at 60 miles an hour without Mark noticing. No way he could have climbed into the sleeper without Mark seeing him move. Just gone, like he'd never been there. Mark sat there for maybe 10 minutes, not moving, not thinking, just trying to make sense of what had happened. Then he noticed the smell. Cigarettes, fresh cigarette smoke, like someone had just put one out. Mark quit smoking 15 years ago. There are no ashtrays in his truck, no lighters, nothing. He doesn't let anyone smoke in his cab, ever, but the smell was there, strong, real. And on the passenger seat, right where Pete had been sitting, there was a quarter. Old one, 1987, the silver worn down like it had been in someone's pocket for a long time. Mark picked it up and held it for a while. It was cold, colder than it should have been, colder than the seat, colder than the air in the cab. He kept driving, didn't know what else to do. Made his delivery, went home, tried to forget about it. But he kept the quarter, still has it, keeps it in his glove box, says he doesn't know why, just feels wrong to throw it away. I asked him if he ever found out who Pete was, if there was a kid who went missing on that road, or someone who died out there trying to get to his mum. Mark said he looked. Spent a few weeks checking news stories, missing persons reports, anything he could find. Nothing matched. No Pete, no broken down car, no young guy trying to get home. Just a name, a conversation, and a cold quarter from 1987. Mark still picks up hitchhikers sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. He says he can't help it. He keeps thinking maybe he'll see Pete again. Maybe Pete's still out there, waiting by that same dark gas station, looking for a ride he never finished. He hasn't seen him yet, but he always checks the passenger seat now, more than he used to, just to make sure whoever's sitting there is still sitting there. Danny's a guy I trust completely. We've worked together, driven in convoy a few times, shared enough bad truck stop meals that I know him pretty well. He's the kind of person who doesn't get rattled. Steady hands, steady voice. The guy you want next to you when something goes wrong, because he'll fix it instead of panicking about it. So when Danny told me about the truck that followed him, I listened. Because Danny doesn't spook easy. He was driving a long haul through some mountain roads, the kind where the curves never stop, and you're always either going up or going down. Late night, not much traffic, just him and his cargo, and the yellow lines unspooling in his headlights. About an hour into that stretch, he noticed headlights in his mirror, another truck, hanging back maybe a quarter mile. Nothing unusual about that. Trucks follow each other all the time, especially on mountain roads, where the speed's consistent and there's not much point in passing. But this truck stayed exactly the same distance behind him, for 2 hours. Danny sped up a little. The truck sped up. He slowed down. The truck slowed down. Always that same gap, that same pair of headlights, floating in his mirror, like they were attached to him by an invisible wire. He tried the CB, called out, asked if anyone was behind him, said he was just checking in. Static. Nothing. He pulled into a rest area, parked, watched his mirrors. The truck pulled in too, parked about 100 yards back. Lights on, engine running, but nobody got out. Danny sat there for 15 minutes watching. The other truck didn't move. Finally, he figured maybe the guy was just taking a break, same as him. Coincidence. He pulled back onto the highway. The truck pulled out behind him. Same distance, same speed, like nothing had happened. Danny said that was when he started to feel it. That cold feeling in your stomach when you know something's wrong, but you can't point to what. He'd been driving for 20 years, and he'd never seen anything like it. Trucks don't follow each other like that. People don't behave that way. He drove faster, pushed his rig harder than he should have on those mountain curves. The truck behind him matched every move, never fell back, never got closer. Just stayed there, those headlights burning in his mirror like eyes that wouldn't blink. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, the sky started to lighten, that grey pre-dawn light that makes everything look flat and unreal. Danny checked his mirror for the 1,000th time. The road behind him was empty. No truck, no headlights, nothing but asphalt and pine trees and the first hint of sunrise coming over the mountains. He pulled over and got out, walked around his rig, checking everything, making sure he wasn't losing his mind. The truck was gone. No sign it had ever been there. Except he walked back to his trailer and stopped. The rear bumper, the heavy steel bar that protects the back of the trailer, it was scratched. Deep scratches, the kind you get when something metal scrapes against you hard and close. Fresh scratches. The metal underneath was still bright, not rusted, not weathered. Whatever made those marks had made them recently. Danny ran his finger along the gouges. They were deep enough that he could feel them through his glove. Something had been riding his bumper. Close, real close, close enough to scrape. But he'd watched his mirrors all night. The truck behind him had never gotten closer than a 1/4 mile. He would have seen it. He would have felt it. He finished his run, delivered his load, and went home. Didn't tell anyone for a long time. What was he going to say? A truck followed me, and then disappeared and left scratches on my trailer. Nobody would believe that. He barely believed it himself. But those scratches were real. He took pictures of them before he got the bumper replaced. Still has those pictures on his phone. Shows them sometimes, when the conversation turns to things that don't make sense. I've seen them, deep parallel gouges in solid steel. Something made those marks, something that was there and then wasn't. Danny still drives those mountain roads, has to. It's part of his regular route. He says he's never seen that truck again, never had anyone follow him like that. But he watches his mirrors more now, especially at night, especially when the road behind him is empty. Because empty doesn't always mean alone. Tom's been driving longer than most people have been alive. 62 years old, planning to retire next spring, and he's got stories that go back to when the highways were different and the trucks were slower and the world was a bigger, darker place. Most of his stories are just stories, funny things, weird things, the kind of stuff that happens when you spend 40 years talking to strangers and sleeping in parking lots. But one of them isn't funny. One of them he doesn't tell unless he's sure you're going to listen. He was driving through a part of the country he knew pretty well, or thought he did. Middle of the night, needed coffee and a bathroom, saw an exit sign for a town he didn't recognize. Small town, the sign said. Services, food. He figured why not. Took the exit, followed the road for about a mile, and found a little main street. Couple of street lights, a few buildings, a diner with the lights on. The kind of place that looks like it's been there forever and isn't going anywhere. He parked his truck and walked into the diner. Old-fashioned place, counter with stools, booths by the windows, a pie case by the register. A few people inside, locals by the look of them, drinking coffee and not talking much. The waitress was maybe 50, tired eyes, polite smile. She looked at Tom a little too long when he sat down, like she was trying to figure something out, but she didn't say anything. Just poured him a coffee and asked what he wanted. Tom ordered a burger, ate it, drank 2 cups of coffee. Good food, nothing special, but solid. The kind of meal you forget by the next day. He paid his bill, left a tip, got change back, thanked the waitress, and walked out. The drive back to the highway felt strange, but he couldn't say why, like the road was longer than it should have been, or the turns were in different places. But he made it back to the interstate and kept driving, figured he was just tired. Next day, he was looking at his route on a map, wanted to check something, make sure he hadn't missed a turn. He found the exit he'd taken and looked for the town. There was no town. The exit existed, sure, but according to every map he could find, there was nothing behind it. No main street, no diner, no buildings, just empty land, fields, and nothing. He thought maybe he'd gotten confused, maybe it was a different exit. So he drove back that way a few weeks later, took the same exit, followed the same road. Nothing. Weeds, dirt, a couple of old foundations that might have been buildings once. No diner, no street lights, no town. Tom sat in his truck for a long time, looking at that empty space, trying to make sense of it. Then he remembered the change. He'd paid with a 20, gotten back some bills and coins. He dug through his stuff until he found them. The coins he'd shoved in his pocket and forgotten about. 3 quarters, a dime, a nickel, and a penny. The penny was normal. The nickel and dime were normal. But one of the quarters was wrong. It was dated 1952, and it looked brand new. Sharp edges, clear details, no wear at all, like it had been minted yesterday. Tom took it to a coin shop, asked about it. The guy behind the counter looked at it under a magnifying glass and said it was real, a genuine 1952 quarter in near mint condition, worth maybe $50 to a collector. "Where'd you get it?" the coin guy asked. Tom didn't know how to answer. He still has that quarter, keeps it in a little box in his kitchen, next to his wife's wedding ring and his father's watch. He doesn't spend it, doesn't show it to many people. Sometimes he takes it out and looks at it, tries to remember the waitress's face, the way she looked at him when he walked in, tries to remember if anyone else in that diner had looked up, looked at him like he was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. He can't remember. It's been too long, and the details have gone soft around the edges, but the quarter's still sharp, still bright, still 1952. Wherever that diner was, whenever it was, he was there. He ate there, paid there, got change there. He just can't find his way back. Eddie's younger than most of the guys I know, 36, been driving maybe 10 years, but he takes it serious, doesn't cut corners, doesn't push his hours, does everything by the book. The kind of driver you want more of, because he makes everyone else look like amateurs. He was running a load through some mountain roads, late night, the kind of driving that keeps you focused, because one wrong move and you're off a cliff. His rig was fully loaded, heavy, and the curves were tight. You have to know what you're doing on roads like that. About halfway through the worst part, his power steering went out. If you've never driven a loaded truck, you don't understand what that means. A fully loaded trailer, 40 tons of cargo, and suddenly you're trying to turn the wheel with nothing but your own arms. It's not possible, not at speed, not on a curve, not without dying. Eddie got the truck stopped, barely, pulled onto a shoulder that was barely wide enough to hold him, wheels inches from the drop-off. Sat there, with his heart trying to break out of his chest, hands shaking so bad he couldn't hold his phone. He got out, walked around the truck, tried to figure out what had gone wrong, opened the hood, looked at the power steering system. Something was broken. He could see that much, but he didn't have the tools or the parts to fix it, and no cell service, and no other traffic. He was standing there, trying to figure out if he could nurse the truck down the mountain in first gear, when he heard footsteps. A man walked out of the darkness. Older guy, maybe 60, wearing a mechanic's coverall, the kind with the name patch on the chest, though Eddie couldn't read it in the dark, carrying a toolbox. "Having trouble?" the guy asked. Eddie said, "Yeah. Power steering's gone. No idea what happened." The mechanic nodded, like he'd heard this 1,000 times. "Let me take a look." He worked for maybe 20 minutes. Didn't say much, just focused on what he was doing. Eddie offered to hold a flashlight, but the guy said he didn't need it. His hands moved in the dark, like he could see just fine. When he was done, he stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. "You're good now," he said. "Keep it slow till you get down to the valley. Don't push it." Eddie reached for his wallet. "What do I owe you?" The mechanic shook his head. "Just pass it on. Help someone else when they need it." Eddie turned to put his wallet back in the cab. Took maybe 5 seconds. When he turned around, the mechanic was gone. No footsteps, no flashlight moving away through the trees, no sound of a car starting, just empty road and silence. Eddie looked around for 10 minutes, called out. Nothing. The guy had vanished like he'd never been there. The power steering worked. Eddie drove down the mountain slow and careful, made it to a town, found a real mechanic in the morning to check his truck. The mechanic took a look at the power steering system and got quiet. "Who fixed this?" he asked. Eddie said some guy on the mountain. Didn't catch his name. The mechanic showed him the repair, said it was solid work, professional, would hold for years. But the technique was old, really old. The way mechanics fixed power steering 30, 40 years ago, before the newer systems came out. "Nobody does it like this anymore," the mechanic said. "Wouldn't even know how, unless you learned it back in the 70s. Eddie asked if that was a problem. "No," the mechanic said. "It's perfect. Better than I could do. I just don't know anyone alive who still works this way." Eddie paid him and left. Didn't know what to think. Still doesn't. He tried to find out if there were any mechanics who lived up on that mountain, any old-timers who might have been out walking at night. Nobody knew anything. No shops up there, no houses, nothing but trees and rock and road. Just a man with a toolbox who knew how to fix things the old way. Eddie still drives those mountains. Every time he passes that spot, he slows down a little. Part of him is hoping he'll see that guy again. Thank him properly. Ask him how he knew to be there at exactly the right time. But the shoulder's always empty. Just gravel and guardrail and a long drop into nothing. Whoever he was, wherever he came from, he did his job and he left. And Eddie's still driving. Gary's the last one I'll tell you about tonight. He's been running the same route for 20 years, knows every mile marker and every exit and every crack in the pavement. The kind of driver who could do it blindfolded, who knows exactly when to shift and when to brake and when to just let the truck roll. That's why what happened to him doesn't make sense. Because Gary doesn't get lost. Gary doesn't get confused. Gary knows that road better than he knows his own house. He was driving it at night, same as always. Nothing unusual, nothing different. Just the highway and the darkness and the white lines pulling him forward. About 2 hours into the run, he passed a billboard. Old thing, advertising a motel that probably hadn't been open in years. The paint was faded, peeling, barely readable. He'd seen it 1,000 times. 20 minutes later, he passed it again. Same billboard, Same faded paint, same angle to the road, same everything. Gary blinked, rubbed his eyes, figured he must be more tired than he thought. Maybe he'd zoned out. Maybe he'd somehow circled back without noticing. It happens sometimes. Road hypnosis. Your brain checks out, and your hands just keep driving. But his GPS said he was going the right direction. His odometer said he'd covered the miles. Everything told him he was moving forward. He kept driving. 20 minutes later, the same billboard. 3 times now. Same sign, same spot, same everything. Impossible. Gary pulled over, got out, walked up to the billboard and looked at it. Real wood, real paint, real rust on the support posts. He touched it, just to make sure he wasn't dreaming. It was there, solid, physical. He got back in his truck and sat for a while. Tried to think it through. There had to be an explanation. Some kind of loop in the road he hadn't noticed. Some trick of the highway design. Something. He started driving again. Watched the odometer. Watched the mile markers. Everything was normal. The road stretched out ahead of him, straight and dark and empty. He never saw that billboard again. The rest of the trip was normal. He made his delivery, went home, didn't tell anyone what happened. What was there to tell? He saw a sign 3 times, and then it went away. Nobody would take that seriously, but it bothered him. So a few weeks later, he went online and looked up that stretch of highway, searched for the motel, the one on the billboard, searched for any sign matching that description. Nothing. According to every map, every satellite image, every record he could find, there was no billboard on that stretch of road. No motel by that name had ever existed there. No sign had ever been posted. Gary drove that route again a month later, paid close attention, watched for the billboard. It wasn't there. He's driven it dozens of times since. It's never been there again. He doesn't know what he saw that night. Doesn't know why the road showed him something 3 times and then took it away. Doesn't know what would have happened if he'd just kept driving. If the sign would have appeared again and again and again, forever. He's glad he stopped. He's glad he got out and touched it. Because at least now he knows it was real. Whatever it was, wherever it came from, he put his hand on it. He felt the rough wood, the flaking paint. It existed. For a little while, on that road, on that night, it existed. And then it didn't. I've told you 7 stories tonight. 7 drivers. 7 things that shouldn't have happened. You can believe them or not. I'm not here to convince you of anything, but I've been driving for 19 years. I've seen a lot of highway, a lot of darkness, a lot of empty miles where anything could happen and no one would ever know. The road at night is a different place. It plays by different rules. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, you catch a glimpse of something that doesn't fit, something that was there and then wasn't, something that helped you or warned you or just watched you pass. I don't have explanations. I just have the stories. Stay safe out there. Keep your lights on and your eyes open. And if you see something that doesn't make sense, don't ignore it. The road's trying to tell you something.